Hello, welcome. Thank you for attending the 50th anniversary of the opening of the new Lawson McGhee Library at 500 West Church Avenue. My name's Nelda Hill, and I'm the Assistant Director for Public Services at Knox County Public Library. I wasn't working at Lawson McGhee when the building opened in 1971, but I had the pleasure of working there for many years. And I've heard wonderful stories about its construction and the big move from the old Lawson McGhee into the new Lawson McGhee. New is an apt description in several senses of the term. Our library was founded in 1886 and is the oldest continuously running public library in the state of Tennessee. We have a long history of innovative, forward-looking, modern librarians, and on June 14, 1971, we finally got an innovative, forward-looking, modern building to match them. So what better way to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the new Lawson McGhee Library than to learn more about Bruce McCarty, the innovative, forward-looking, and modernist architect who designed it. We're delighted to have Doug McCarty and Nathan Honeycutt here to talk about the enormous impact Bruce McCarty had on Knoxville architecture. As most of you know, Doug McCarty is Bruce McCarty's son. He is Chairman Emeritus of McCarty Holsapple McCarty, and was recently elevated to the College of Fellows, the highest membership honor given by the American Institute of Architects. That's right, let's clap. Nathan Honeycutt is a principal at McCarty Holsapple McCarty. He's worked on projects all over the world and is known for his collaborative approach to design. They will be taking questions, so save your questions. If you have them, you can go ahead and put them in chat. They'll get to your questions at the end of the presentation. Let me just say that I am grateful to work in such an interesting and lovely building, a building with lots of windows. I'm sure I would have quit years ago had there not been so many beautiful windows to watch Knoxville grow through. As a library, we've responded to a lot of changes over the years, and some of the early design components had to be relinquished to meet the demands of technology and the needs of the public we serve. Form and function have clashed from time to time, and our building has remained strong but malleable. So if you haven't visited us in a while, please do. I think you'll appreciate what you find. So, Mr. McCarty.
Thank you very much, Nelda. I am honored to be here tonight to be part of this library's 50th anniversary celebration. This building was definitely one of my dad's favorite civic buildings that he was a major part of designing. The discussion today, my partner Nathan Honeycutt will be presenting Dad's related work that he designed during the 60s and the 70s. I will then discuss in more detail the library itself. But before we do that, I would like to talk a little bit about my dad's earlier work. As most of you know, his reputation was pretty much built from doing single family houses. I lived in two of those houses. And then we had a great mountain house outside of Gatlinburg, Tennessee, that also was designed by my dad. And a lot of the ideas that came out of those designs were related to his love for natural light, to nature, the importance of a clear structural system that related to the concept of the building, And also something that was equally important to him is the importance of every detail within the building. Not only the detail, but many times the built-in furniture and those kind of elements. One of his main mentors or inspirations was Frank Lloyd Wright, and he took a lot of this, designing the entire structure all the way down to the furniture, as a major theme in his architecture. I bring up this early, the work he did in the 50s, because a lot of these points that I mentioned, and Nathan will be talking about them in a minute, are very similar within these more robust, more brutalistic structures that were done in the 60s and 70s and somewhat in the 80s. The love for natural light being important to bring life to the interior of the building, the importance of structure, and many of the other things that we'll be talking about in this presentation. So now I'll turn it over to Nathan to talk about some of the buildings that were done during this time, and then I'll get back and talk in more detail about the library itself.
Great,
Nathan?
Thanks. Yep. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. And I'm going to screen share now. And so let me know if you guys can't see it. So just one second. All right. Can everyone, Doug, can you see the screen? You'll be
Yes.
my guide. Great. So like Doug said, you know, we're here obviously to talk about the library and the fantastic structure that it is. But as a precursor to that conversation, we wanted to talk about the work being done by the firm and Bruce in and around that time. So to give it sort of context and hopefully bring some awareness and appreciation to the other buildings in Knoxville. And you'll see through the course of the conversation kind of a lot of the influences and the parts of the different buildings that really came together in a beautiful way to form this library and this structure. So if you sort of look at a timeline of that time period, just briefly, 1965 is when Bruce McCarty and Associates was formally formed. Like Doug said, prior to that, Bruce was heavily in the residential field and doing a lot of some other commercial work, but was well known for his residential stuff. So during this kind of time period from 65 to 75, there was a lot of great work in Knoxville, but just some of the key pieces were, of course, 1968 being Westminster Church, which we're going to cover. 69 was the UT Communications Building. 1970, kind of before the library, was the UT Humanities Plaza and the Clarence Brown Theatre. And then right in the middle of that, you had, of course, the great Lawson McGhee Library. But sort of in the firm at the same time was the UT Administration Building, and then really pretty quickly after were the Mountain View parking garages, which are over near the Coliseum. Now, you know, the City County Building, the Coliseum themselves, other things, of course, kind of happened outside of this and were a great time period and had a huge impact in Knoxville. But we just kind of wanted to focus in and around this time period because it really ties into, you know, when the library was designed and built. Now, a lot of architects on the line are going to be very familiar with these sort of guiding principles. But at the time, you know, these were really revolutionary. I mean, and these principles transcended Bruce's work. They transcended Frank Lloyd Wright's work, a lot of the great architects at the time, and their influence is carried through a lot of the great architecture today. And again, so when we talk through these things, you're going to be like, oh, that's, of course, we do that today, but we do that today because of buildings like the library that were revolutionary for their time. So the guiding principles on all of the architecture we're looking at were that guided Bruce was, one, of course, was natural light, right, and sustainable design. Both, having access to it, having views out, and having natural light come in, and having that connection. The expression of the structure and of the building systems was important in the architecture. Using natural materials, woods, the stones, the brick, even concrete, and expressing those. Connecting the inside to the outside. This is something we love to do today, with our outdoor patios and our living rooms. But again, at the time, it was very revolutionary. And the thought of trying to bring these courtyard spaces into the building and bring the building's kind of public spaces out into nature, and really stitching those two together. Softening the forms, again, was a big driver. You'll see it in the rounded edges, the rounded corners, and a lot of the architectural features. And then the importance of total design, like Doug alluded to, including the furniture, right down to literally designing the pieces of furniture and how they go into the building, how they integrate. I think the carousels, the reading carousels, are a great example of those in the library space. So just starting to look at the different projects that were mentioned. And the first one is Westminster Presbyterian Church, which is a fabulous building, of course, done before the library, but there's several things you'll see that carried over. The church itself, was inspired by a lot of the European cathedrals, but Bruce wanted to do it in a very modern way. You can see again, like the library, there's a lot of the softer kind of rounded forms. And then one of the big things about this was, again, sort of like the library, the church is built into the hill. And so the children's spaces, which are actually underneath, spill out into a courtyard space. And this is, for those that aren't familiar with it, this is the wall. It's kind of the courtyard space that has the children's area underneath, much like the design approach for the Lawson McGhee Library. The inside space, again, you see a lot of the guiding principles about carrying that exterior material into the inside space. So the brick just didn't stop on the outside, it was brought inside. And then, of course, the use of natural light, and both strategically through skylights over the altar space, and the clear story windows up high. The natural materials with the wood, the concrete, and the brick, again, are all relevant and carried from this building into the future. UT Communications, Doug's got a really kind of interesting story about communications. Doug, what you want to tell it?
Sure. This is back when, this is probably when I first started realizing that I might become an architect. I was in my teens. I mean, I think we had the date of 69, but that's when it was pretty much finished. He started designing this building back in, I'm thinking 63, 64, when I was 13, 14 years old. We're up in this mountain house that I mentioned, which is just a beautiful house that he designed with just glass on, looking to beautiful views to the mountains and all. This was our vacation home. We'd go there once every summer, or quite a few times during the summer. But a lot of times Dad would take work up with him. Architects tend to keep drawing, can't stop. And he was developing the concepts for the communications building. And he was working with his T-square and his radius, compasses, etc. And I went up and started asking him questions. I know Don Freeman's on the Zoom, and Don knows I have a lot of questions. You need to ask questions before you get the right answers. And so I started asking Dad these questions and about, how was he developing the concept? What was the program? What was the concept of wrapping around Circle Park, basically? How did these stairways relate to the interior of the building? And I noticed that, and we're very different personalities, but he has some of the patience that sometimes I don't have. But So he would just spend hours talking to me about different ideas, different concepts of why he was doing what he was doing. And I think that that particular summer evening is when I started thinking that I probably would follow his footsteps and become an architect. From that point, you know, we started designing buildings pretty much together. I came back from New York and worked with him on designing the city county building, and then worked together with a lot of other architects in the community, designing the World's Fair. And then the one that we had the most fun designing probably was the state one competition of the arts and architecture building. So anyway, I'll turn it back to Nathan to continue the discussion.
No, absolutely. And thanks, Doug. And this building in particular, again, that connection to nature was the overall driver of the whole shape of the building, right? I mean, the way Doug, explained it to me was that, the entire building was shaped literally, by the Circle Park and its relationship to that outdoor space. So this, again, some of the features that you start to see in Circle Park, you can pick up on in the Lawson McGhee. The expression of the staircase, right, as a vertical brick element, which again was sort of revolutionary at the time, because most staircases previously were hidden, or but to bring those out, make them a vertical feature on the building, with the rounded corners, much like Lawson McGhee. The other thing you see here that I think is interesting is the idea of the second floor becoming this floating kind of mass of concrete, right? Letting the first floor be really transparent and open, and try to have that relationship with both nature and people. And again, I think a lot of that kind of similar language translates to the library structure. This building was also one of the first ones where Bruce started playing around with precast, and really understanding it as a contemporary material, and one that should be explored and used further. Shortly following that, was the Humanities Building and Plaza. This rendering is great. You can see that actually 2 towers were planned at one time. Of course, only one was built. The second tower was never built, but I do think it was interesting that in the original, a second tower was planned. We know that the towers have kind of have had some controversy, but in general, programmatically, the idea was, of course, to free up as much of the ground plane to be a public plaza, to be an outdoor space for the students. Again, with sort of a cantilevered mass. Here, Bruce sort of cut back the corners of the building to really emphasize the vertical, which is pretty consistent. And again, you see a lot of the soft forms and access to natural light used in these buildings. At that same time, again, just before the library was the Clarence Brown Theatre. And hopefully most of you have been to a performance or two there. One of the great things about Bruce, and I think it translated to Doug and the firm, and he's instilled it in us, is the ability to collaborate with other great designers, whether they're in town or out of town. And like on this one, I know he worked with Pat James and Bill Moorfield. Pat James was also a contributing designer to the library structure, so they worked together on not just this one, but Lawson McGhee as well. I think, again, I don't have to repeat kind of at this point, you can probably pick up a lot on the similar vernacular of the time. One detail I will point out is, the sort of brick forms that were used on the interior space of the Clarence Brown. Here, they became the mass that allowed people to come and go through those kind of brick mat forms. In the library, those same brick forms allow light, right, to kind of pass through them in the way people do in the actual theater space. And then again, this was sort of on the boards at the tail end of construction, but You'll see a lot of the same kind of language in the garages that were built around the Coliseum. The kind of corrugated or textured concrete was something that was used on the library, and again was the use of precast that started in Circle Park and then got applied to both the library and these garages. That vernacular kind of transcended through all the structures at that time. That was part of Bruce's work and part of that time period. The administration building, which is built on the backside of Circle Park. Just a little side note story. This is, actually how it was constructed. But and if you'll notice, again, the cantilevered masses, the expression of the staircases. The one small note: this building was actually meant to have another 2 stories on it when it was originally designed. Here's a rendering from the original. You'll notice that it had 2 more stories on top. This was the proportion that the building was meant to have, but because of budget issues, they lost the top 2 floors, so it didn't quite achieve the look that Bruce was after for that time. But a lot of the same design vernacular transcended and was used here. So I'm going to turn it over to Doug to actually talk about the design of the structure of the library structure itself.
Thank you, Nathan. Now to talk about the building we're celebrating tonight. This first slide is just sort of an introduction slide, but you start seeing some of these guiding principles or concepts that are running through a lot of these buildings. And I won't repeat what Nate, I will be repeating it some, but not on this slide. So let's go to the next slide. Notice the ribbed concrete elements above, and then go to the next slide. And another thing that was true with not only going the wrong direction, there you go. It is designed for my dad as well as myself. Nathan can speak for himself, but was not easy. I mean, it was what we both did is just study a lot of different options until we almost exhausted the options and found the solution that was the right solution. And this is one example. If you go back and forth between the two, this particular earlier design had a much heavier top to the entire building of concrete, and that just wasn't appropriate. And look at the difference in the beauty of the previous, the way the building was built versus the way this rendering was. This was well into schematic design, but he wasn't happy with it. And so he kept studying it, and then he broke down the forms that needed to be solid on that upper level. But he allowed, slit window strips both on each side and above the ribbed concrete to sort of fit into the main frame of the building itself. So I think it was a real improvement that also just shows how he would study and study and study until he got the right solution. Next slide. Nathan, are you still awake?
Yeah, you should be. I mean, you should be on the floor plan now.
Now I am, yes. Okay, so now we're getting into the floor plans, and of course this is just cutting each building at each level. Starting at the lowest level, the main area to talk about here is the children's area. That sound, this is basically in a basement area, and that sounds pretty wrong to be putting children down there. But the way he resolved this is by having the areaway, which is toward the street, that brought natural light into the building and really created a very, very nice space. And then within the space, he has some very playful forms that add interest for the kids, and little dropped wells where they can have their storytelling, etc. This particular is the section, cutting a section through the building, basically shows the very soft north light that comes through the end of the areaway and into the space itself. And as you see on the upper part of the building, there's also skylights that we'll talk about later. And this also shows above, we'll get into the next level floor plan, but shows the main reading space also takes advantage of the north light looking toward Church Street. Now going back to the lower level, this is I want to go back to the rendering of the lower level, Nathan.
Yeah, sorry, you're delayed. You and I are delayed for some reason. So
okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this is basically a rendering, and this is Nathan mentioned Pat James, and John Aliard was another designer that was more of an interior architect working on the project, and he was very involved in developing these rendering and developing some of the more playful ideas within the building itself. And the main level is where the main living room space is. I call it community living room, and I really think it is that, or really was that before a lot of the other buildings and hotels were built downtown. That it's really one of the main big ideas of the building. That is the place that the community gathers, and you maybe gather there. You may come at lunch break and read the newspaper, and it's just a very comfortable space where it's just a very, very pleasant place to be. So I think that became, in this part of town, a real place to meet people and to gather and to just sit and read as appropriate. And you're looking into the natural light and the views back to the street. You've got the rounded forms of the stairways that are expressed outside and inside. You've got the brick that goes inside and outside. There again, sort of blurring the materials between the indoors and outdoors. You've got unique elements on the east elevation that bring natural light into the space, but also a lot of masonry to shade to keep the sun from coming directly into the stacks. So there's not a lot of glass on the east and west elevations. You also have the playful forms of the spiral stair, which were painted bright yellow for many years, and I believe that's no longer there, but that was a very playful sculptural element within the building itself.
And Doug, you may want to mention that I think one of the interesting parts, these forms on top of, obviously you want the nice north light, which was great with this, and he shielded the east and west light by incorporating these forms, but these forms also created a vertical rhythm that was at the time sort of based on the townhomes that were on what's now the federal site, right?
Yes, yes.
Which I think, let me just go back real quick. Yeah, so which you can actually see in this rendering here. I thought it was kind of an interesting play, so these forms, at the time were kind of reminiscent of the townhomes that were there that are no longer there.
Okay, now going to the mezzanine level.
This is the main community space, the community living room.
Yes. You need to.
You should be on it now. Just give it a second.
Yes, yes. Okay, and taking advantage of this living room space, really, most of the library opens out into it. So when you're on the mezzanine, you still feel that you're part of this very, very important central space. We've talked about the southwest and east elevations don't have as much views and natural light on those elevations because most all of the natural light is coming from the north. Another feature on the mezzanine, this is really the first time that in the library design, I did the same at the UT library, that the study carrels were built into the architecture, and you'll see that in some of the renderings and photographs later on. But that's an example how design was so important down to the very detail of the furnitures and in the building.
And Doug,
This is a good image that shows the study carrels and how they cantilever off of the into the reading room itself. And I was mentioning to Nathan earlier, for those of you who have been in the art and architecture building, this is sort of a miniature of the faculty offices that we designed, cantilevering out into the street space of the arts and architecture building.
This is sort of the precursor, right? That's great.
And then the top level being, basically the reason for this, the second level, is to show the natural light. Not only is most of the natural light coming from the north, but also at the entry of the building, there's this 3-story space that has these wonderful circular skylights that bring natural light into the entry itself and also into other spaces deeper into the building itself. And that shows how that really makes that entry element much more delightful and exciting as you enter the library. And you also see the brick forms that are happening, that come from the inside, from the outside of the building to within. This section shows the natural light again, the skylights again, so that whole portion of the building was just had sunlight all through it, which other spaces borrowed light from that central space. And this is pretty much one of the last slides. This is basically shows the celebration of that when you're walking down Church, and the celebration of the light, the windows, looking into the what I call the city living room. And then the last slide. I really love this slide when Nathan found it, because it tells the whole story of the building, from the really strong concrete frame, the carrels, the built-in furniture, the living room. The big idea to me of the project was the living room space where people could gather. And then you've got the natural materials of the wood, the natural light. You see even reflections of the circular skylights that you see in the windows above. So that pretty much completes our discussion about the library. We'd now like to, if anybody has any questions, we'd be glad to have a discussion about it.
Can you hear me? Am I?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Stuart is asking, will phase 2 ever happen in the John Duncan parking lot?
I think the answer to that probably is no. I think the library, Nelda may have some ideas about that, but I think that may be difficult because the GSA, the federal building property, pretty much took over that property. And at this point, I don't think, and Nelda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think expansion is necessarily needed at this point. But I think another great thing about this building is it's designed with a lot of flexibility. So one of my other partners, Jeff Johnson, has specialized in libraries, and flexibility is huge. I mean, it used to be all about books, and books are still extremely important, but now it's about computers, it's about gathering spaces, it's about so much more. And I think this building allows itself to be flexible and to change over time. But Nelda might have more to say about whether an expansion is in the thinking or a possibility.
I'm not aware of one. You're absolutely right. We have done, looking at this picture, we look awfully busy and we look awfully crowded. And we recently, over the last couple of years, sort of figured out ways based on the new technology to kind of open up the space again. And it just dawned on me, we're looking more like the original building than we used to. I mean, with
Wow.
with the open space, and we no longer have the wall-to-wall shelves, and the reference area has moved to where I think I had heard it was originally intended to be. So you're right. Libraries are not about huge buildings so much anymore. It's about working within the space you have. We'd love for you to help us with that, though.
Great. We'd be glad to.
Let's see. Any other questions?
I had one this May Palm. There's a stairwell going up to the 4th floor. It looks like it's very finished. And I'd heard that there were plans to expand to the 4th floor, but then codes changed and it's not load bearing for books. But is it still possible technically to expand to the rooftop with some sort of, lighter weight functionality?
I think about, Nathan, that may have been before you came with the firm, but we did study that. and even back then, the codes had changed. And we did study the possibility of a lighter weight structure because of the changed codes as it relates to earthquake codes. As I remember, it was maybe still possible, but the codes might have changed again. So it might be very difficult, but to me, anything's possible. So if that was something that needed to happen, I think it should be studied at least. But one would need to do it very carefully because one wouldn't want to really, you need to be very careful not to destroy the look of the original architecture.
Rooftop garden.
Oh, yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, I think anything we have would need to step back from probably all the facades to not destroy the architecture. And gardens, green roofs would be wonderful, but there again, these may be dreams and structurally they may not be doable.
This is Bonnie, and I have a question. This was built before the American Disabilities Act, and so things have had to change to accommodate people with disabilities. Stairways, for one thing, and in the main on the main floor is this what was the circular stairway to the 2nd floor, the audio visual. And that
Right.
is now no longer there, correct, Nelda?
Right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to
And-
love that stairway, but I'm sure Nelda can
It-
address why that changed, probably either for functional reasons, for
Well,
flexibility.
We needed the space. It was a trip hazard. It was a child magnet.
Right.
I think
Right.
there was hardly a week that some child did not fall down those stairs. So, but they loved them. They'd fall, get up, and race back up. I am remembering, Bonnie, speaking of that, we did have a ramp for stroller and wheelchair access. And that was considered pretty innovative, at least in the 80s. This was pre-ADA. It had to be redone. But do you remember that kind of steep ramp that went? That was in
Yes,
the river?
yes, I do. Yes, I do, because I remember the first Lawson McGhee Library up on Vine. So yes, I do remember that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess that thing about the children's room, it does have natural light coming into it, but it's north light. And I live in a house that faces northwest. Nathan knows, and then east west, depending on where you are. But I really get this, I mean, sorry, north south. I get the south sun a lot. So a north light to me is an interesting concept because it's not a very bright light.
No,
So
and it's not, yeah, and it's not meant to be. And that's one of the things I think Doug was sort of alluding to is, you know, again, you have to have bigger windows, right, to really take advantage of that north light, but you don't get a lot of the solar heat gain when you
right,
face north. You don't get that kind of glaring sun like you do when you go east or west, and which helps protect the books, right? So
True,
that was part of it.
true.
Here was to actually, you know, take advantage of the natural light, of the quote unquote kind of good natural light that you could, without the kind of damaging light that you would get from some of the southern or eastern
From
and
any
western
other
exposure.
direction, right? Any
Yeah.
other direction.
Well,
Yeah.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, there were trees that were down in that
Yes,
lower level.
yes, there were.
So a lot of it was not so much just bringing natural light into the lower level, but it was looking out to I think they were maybe beech trees, or
Yeah.
I forget what, but they
Mhm.
were beautiful trees. I think they over time outgrew their space.
Right.
But I think they really added, instead of looking at a concrete wall, which was a retaining wall that made up the areaway, you were looking out at these beautiful trees.
Right. Right. And I do remember when those trees were there. So that was, you added the green space, but you also blocked a little bit of the light.
Mhm.
That's
Very
true.
true.
That's true.
Very true.
Hey, Doug, this is Stuart.
Yeah.
You know, just looking at this photograph here, this is an excellent photograph to be ending on. And it very much typifies a lot of the work that both you and Bruce did. And what makes some of this work so exciting is how open it is. I cannot tell you how much enjoyment I had when we were over at the School of Architecture, the life that it brings to the school to be open like this, to be able to engage and see other people doing things, as compared to, you know, much older buildings where you come in a front, you know, foyer, and then you're going down corridors to rooms behind doors. It's not as much life, and it is the natural light and it is the openness, but just looking at all these different activities going on just brings so much more energy to the space and makes it so much more pleasant to be in. I mean, even the city county building, it makes the whole building comprehensible in that you can immediately understand it when you come in, and you don't feel lost or feel intimidated by any means when you're trying to move through it. So this is a great shot right here.
That's a great point, Stuart, because that's what it's hard for us, you know, today, in today's time and period, where we're used to walking into buildings with these great open spaces now. You know, this was done before malls, before, you know, a lot of these kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I can imagine, like, at the time, I mean, when you walk in, I mean, this would just be totally, you know, totally new and vibrant, future, you know, forward looking, you know, space. And it still is. And that's the great part about it, is that it's so timeless, that it still has that impact even today.
But to add to that, Stuart, and you've been major part of one of these projects, that statement sort of reminds me of the design challenges on the university student center, where the new student center, where you have a huge building, but you need to circulate all the way through it. And we were very careful on designing these kind of spaces. So it's much easier to move through the building and for natural light to come into the circulation spaces. And sort of the same thing we did on the UT library, which was there again, a massive structure, but we designed these 2- and 3-story spaces that you can move through the building to get from one side to the other.
Doug or Nathan, there was a question from Poppy or Cliff Beach about UT. You know, there's, let me see. Do you think Bruce's UT buildings will be able to survive the current focus on the uniform Gothic-ish theme for the campus?
Will they survive? Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, there's this effort to go in this uniform nouveau
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Of course, we're designing a lot of buildings at the university still, and I think the majority of the buildings that Dad designed, that Nathan went through, I think are pretty safe. I mean, they're considered classics, if you will. So I don't think there's a danger of putting collegiate Gothic dormers or gables on any of those kind of buildings. Now, there's some of the other buildings like Presidential Complex that, you know, that have been demolished because those buildings and the replacement of those buildings have been much more traditional. And so some of the lesser buildings like at the Presidential Complex, the Speech and Hearing Clinic, the building adjacent to the law school, I forget the name of it, but those buildings will probably be demolished at some time.
Oh,
But I think these buildings are pretty safe to remain.
well, this is Bonnie again, and I have to say, I'm sorry, I really do like the Gothic look for the campus. I do like those new dorms. But I tell you what, I have a hard time appreciating is the new energy efficient buildings like the music building. I don't think they're very pretty.
Well,
They're green.
and in terms of that, I think a campus, I mean, I felt comfortable when we designed, you know, the collegiate Gothic buildings. I mean, we've designed the student center I just mentioned.
Sure.
You know, it has some elements in the building that relate to the collegiate architecture of the
Exactly.
campus, but
Right.
it also has some contemporary feelings about it, with the skylights, with the interior spaces, with the amount of glass bringing more light into the building than the more traditional collegiate Gothic buildings
Agree.
of the early century. And we're doing that. I mean, you might have been by another lab building that we designed on adjacent to the graduate library, the Mosman building, which Don Freeman was very involved in that one. He's on this Zoom. As you see, that definitely has references to collegiate Gothic with the front entry gable, but it also has much larger windows, much more natural light, and the interior spaces are much more, because of the natural light and just the feel of the spaces are much more contemporary within.
Right. Right.
So I think
Agree.
you can still do both. I mean, I will admit, you know, when we were designing the law school, Dad worked on it some, and it frustrated him a little bit. I mean, you know, but we're, you know, that is basically the way I view that. It's now basically part of the program statement, and you can still do a wonderful building if part of the program is to design a building that blends more with the collegiate Gothic architecture of the campus.
Right. I agree.
Okay, we have a question from Bitsy Ingram. Doug mentioned the influence of Wright. What about Kahn? I'm thinking Exeter Library.
I think Kahn, that's a good question, Bitsy or Lee. Kahn was really my main inspiration when I was him and Lou Kahn and I.M. Pei, a little bit of Le Corbusier. I think in the later projects that we didn't talk about, I think there was more the Lou Kahn, like the Art and Architecture Building and some of those. These earlier ones, I think you're probably right, but Dad wasn't as much inspired by Lou Kahn at that time until a little bit later on. But I think definitely some of these buildings could have been inspired by Lou Kahn's architecture, no question.
Kara Cersei talked about how much fun she and her children had in the children's room, in the reading pit, the story well. And she closes by saying, your father's vision provided so much joy for so many little ones. That's a great thing.
That's great. Thank you.
Doug, I don't know if you want to mention, but there was actually not just this library, but there were other branch libraries that we didn't really get into, right? That were part of it. So it wasn't just touching or affecting the community through this one library, but there were actually multiple branch locations that were designed.
Yeah, those branch libraries were much more inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright than this particular library.
Which branches did you have a hand in?
Well, Dad did. It was the one I know about is the one in South Knoxville, probably right across from
the old Young High School, and the Kroger Shopping
the old
Center.
Young High School, right. That was one, and I think there's another one out maybe north
Knoxville.
And they both have a similar design. They've got big cantilevers on all four sides, a lot of masonry with some. The windows are all very high, so the whole cantilevered roof appears to be floating. They're really elegant, and then the way the gutter systems work are really very well done.
I see that several people are asking about the Sequoia branch. The Sequoia branch is very similar vernacular, right, Doug? But I don't believe Bruce did that one.
I believe that was Barb McMurray.
Yeah. So, but it's a very similar vernacular to the other branches that Bruce was part of.
Right.
Mary Palm wants to know, what building are you most proud of?
I could guess which one Doug's going to answer, but I want to see what he says.
Well, I'm not going to say Art and Architecture Building. I think the architects on the call might agree with that, but I've done so many different projects. A&A Building is one of my favorite, very modernist buildings. Tennessee Theater renovation, that was a fantastic experience working on that project. Very different, complete opposite from like the Art and Architecture Building. And I think the new student center is something we associated with. That was a joint venture with Barb McMurray, and that's one that basically was 10 years of my life working on that project, because it was a two-phase, very complicated project. But I think those are the three that come to mind the quickest for me in terms of ones that I had the most fun working on. All right, more questions? I'm getting hoarse.
Oh, Mary, I think Mary, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
I keep asking questions, so sorry about that. If you all weren't here in Knoxville to kind of push a modern agenda, which I love, what would Knoxville look like? I mean, was there anybody else also doing really good modern architecture?
Mary, I'll answer that. No, and they're still not. MHM's the best. but I'm a
I
little
was going
far.
to say there's some, back in that period, Bart McMurray were doing some good buildings. Marlene Davis lives in a beautiful house that they did. And I think now there's some, Bart McMurray's doing some, I'm going to not be as egotistical as Nathan, Bart McMurray's doing some very good work. Lee Ingram's on this call. He does some just very special, important work, churches and other projects. Sanders Pace, many others are doing some very good architecture. We've got a lot of tough competition now, and so we're
But
still
in
the
the
best. I
day-
think.
But
yeah,
in the day, in the
at the
60s,
time.
In the day, Dad was the best modernist, no question.
Okay, one more question. What of the buildings that have been built and have been torn down kills you the most, hurts you the most?
Probably Bob Church's bank
Yes,
on Western Plaza.
yes, yes,
Mhm.
yes, yes. I agree.
Yes.
That was a
That was
heartache.
very sad. Now, I don't know if he's on the call. One of the bittersweet parts of the student center project was having to demolish the Bob Church's parking garage. It was, in fact, we even studied trying to renovate the garage into a portion of the building, and that was just not doable. So it was a parking garage that at the time was just it was a beautiful sculptural element, at least the modernist architects believe it was. And I hated for that building to go, but programmatically it had to go to meet the requirements of the program.
A lot of people are agreeing with you on that.
Okay. I need to get back to the,
Georgiana Vines is saying, I didn't know that some of the buildings at UT were to be larger than they became. Does that happen often in your line of work or just with publicly financed buildings?
I think she's referring to are you referring to the tower that was supposed to have 2 extra floors, right? And now it doesn't? Yeah.
And then
now
did
Nathan, you better
the
answer that question because
administration
I'm not sure I
building
understand the question without it being
too? Okay,
repeated.
I thought there were 2 buildings.
Oh, and that's
think it was
humanities,
humanities. Oh,
you're
right?
talking
That was
about
supposed to have
Then
2.
wasn't also the administration building another example? And I thought, okay, I wonder if this happens often in this line of work, or if it's just those that have some public financing with them.
Well, I think, Humanities Building had the in a way, it's sort of like when before you design the building, even though you don't have the needs today, it's good to master plan for future needs. And with the Humanities Building, I think there was just it became sort of even though programmatically it worked at the time, with the way teaching needs to happen today, the faculty didn't need to be up in a tower. They need to be down with their students. That's sort of the idea in the art and architecture building, that the faculty couldn't hide from the students. They were part of the street. The administration building, I'm thinking you may be right. In the master plan, there may have been 2 towers. Nathan did mention that the one that was built.
I think he mentioned it.
Okay. No, we definitely did have to reduce the number of floors. And so, but yeah, in a lot of the major work, we master plan more that ends up being built.
And that's not just publicly. That
think that
happens a lot,
explains
there's always sort of a
makes a lot of
balancing
sense.
act. Yeah,
Yeah,
between
thank you very much.
program and function and budget. So
I do have a question. This is Bonnie again about the art and architecture building. I have heard over the years that it was never the final outer finish was never applied. Is that true?
That is not true. Now there's been jokes when Dr. Johnson and I were good friends and we'd go to lunch a lot, and a lot of the academic, that was a state design competition, and Probably if it had not been a competition with the selection was a jury of architects, it probably wouldn't have been designed or built that way. But a little history behind the A&A building. We won, it was to be the entire building was to be a teaching tool. So we wanted everything basically exposed inside the building. If you've been, the ductwork and the systems of the building are all exposed. The same idea was taken for the exterior of the building, that, you know, we didn't want to clad all of the structural concrete with masonry. And we wanted to contrast what is an architectural school from the rest of the campus. Now, when I was working at I.M. Pay's office, I worked on a school, Choate School, that I.M. Pay designed that used that same concrete formwork, which was a very hard, slick finish, and that was the finish that we were after. Now, what we learned on that project is that with I.M. Pay and Choate School, they could select their subcontractors. So they selected a subcontractor who treated the building of forms like millwork or carpentry. And so they had a much more qualified contractor to do the work. And so the quality of the work was reduced because this was a competitively bid project, and we basically got the low bidder, and therefore there were problems with the final finish of the concrete.
So it looks a little raw.
Well, that was in a way part of the idea. We wanted, you call it raw, we called it pure and honest, expressing the nature
I'm a
of the building.
traditionalist, Bruce. I mean, we're not Bruce. Duh, you know where I live.
I understand, and I always say, you know, everybody, all the administrators and most laymen hate the building until you go inside it. Most people like the inside of the building. Most architects, it's their favorite building on campus. So,
right,
what you do?
I know. I'm stone and stucco. Stone and stucco.
A good pressure washing goes a long way every now and then, and so if the building could benefit from that. I think the library just benefited from that, right? Yeah.
I was telling Mary Palm I'd love them to do it to A&A building.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, in honor of our 50th anniversary of the building on Church Avenue, got a little facelift. We got pressure washed all week long. So drop by and see it. It really does brighten it up. It just looks fabulous. We're still doing a little more, and we're going to add some banners to it, but
Can't wait to go by and see it.
Yeah, I got to say, as someone who works in that building every day, I have always loved it. I love the light and the warmth and the openness, and it really is a pleasure to work there. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. And now that the outside is less dingy, I even like that.
Great evening.
Well, this has been great talking about my dad and one of his favorite buildings. So again, Mary Palm and Nelda, thank you very much for inviting us, having us part of this special event.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been great.
And thank you for bringing modern architecture to Knoxville.
Very good. We'll keep doing it.
Okay. Thanks all.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Good night.
Have a great evening.